Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into something that affects, well, pretty much everyone in the modern workplace. We're talking about how new technologies are fundamentally reshaping the culture within organizations. We've got the materials you shared, articles, research, all looking at these shifts. And our mission really is to unpack the key insights, maybe some surprising facts from these sources, just to help you get a handle on how tech is, changing how we all work together. I mean, just think about your own work life. Constant pings, video calls, checking email on your phone, whatever. These aren't just tools anymore, are they? They're actually changing the culture. So let's get into what the material shows us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating because the sources really drive home that technology isn't just sitting in the background. It's like an active force. It's constantly interacting with and changing how organizations work in really significant ways.
And honestly, one of the first things that jumps out, something I think we can all relate to, is that feeling of being, constantly connected. Yeah. The sources call it the always-on culture. It feels pretty accurate, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you've got smartphones, tablets, laptops. You can access work stuff from anywhere, anytime. And those lines between work and personal life, they just get incredibly blurry, especially if you're using the same device for both work and, life.
And that constant access kind of morphs into this expectation, or at least a really strong pressure maybe to respond outside of normal work hours. Makes it really tough to properly switch off.
And the material we looked at is pretty stark about the downsides. It really does chip away at work-life balance. And the sources clarify it's not just about like a 50-50 time split. It's defined more as feeling fulfilled, content in both your work and your non-work life. When that gets thrown off balance, the research suggests, productivity can take a hit, morale too. And it definitely seems to fuel stress, pressure, which can, eventually lead straight to burnout if it's not managed.
Yeah, and it's not just an individual thing either, is it? The sources mention how it can mess with team dynamics. Like if some people are always online responding at all hours and others try to keep boundaries, that can create tension, maybe even a weird kind of competition instead of collaboration.
But what's also interesting is seeing the pushback, the attempts to sort of rein this in that the material covers. You've got things like France bringing in that right to disconnect law back in 2017, specifically tackling this constant digital tether.
Yes. And there were some company examples too. I remember one about Volkswagen, quite striking actually. Years ago, apparently they configured their email servers. Basically, emails would only hit employee phones like half an hour before and after work, and not at all outside those times. That seems like a really concrete step, almost dramatic.
It is, yeah. And it brings up a really important kind of counterpoint that was in the research. While just banning after-hours email might sound great for helping people switch off, a study mentioned from the University of Sussex Business School in the UK found it could actually stop some people from hitting their goals and kind of surprisingly cause more stress for those people. It just shows that these impacts and the fixes, they're not always straightforward.
That's a really good point. Definitely not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit from that feeling of being always on to maybe a more active use of tech monitoring employees.
Right. So the tools that enabled all this flexible and remote work, video conferencing, cloud services, chat apps, they've also kind of inevitably led to a big rise in digital monitoring tools, especially with hybrid and remote work becoming so common.
And the reasons given for this, according to the sources we saw, they cover a bit of ground. There's the obvious stuff. Tracking attendance, workload, performance, productivity, making sure people are actually working. And also trying to deter things like, playing online games or shopping when you should be working.
Sure. But what's kind of fascinating and maybe a bit unexpected is the material also suggests monitoring could potentially be used to support employees, like to prevent burnout. The idea is by collecting data on active hours, like seeing emails sent late at night, companies could theoretically use that info to make sure people are actually taking enough time off.
That's an interesting angle. Though the actual monitoring methods described, they sound pretty intense. We're talking about recording keystrokes, taking screenshots of screens, recording calls, even accessing webcams, and using AI to scan messages for sentiment or harassment or compliance issues. Wow.
Yeah, it can get quite granular. And the cultural fallout from that kind of intense monitoring, well, the sources say it's pretty significant. Employees feeling like they're under constant surveillance, privacy invasion, which naturally breeds stress, damages trust, hugely important for culture, and just makes people hesitant, less likely to communicate openly.
So the material really hammers home this need for organizations to find a balance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Weighing up the operational needs against, well, the law, data protection rules, and the ethics of it all. Respecting privacy.
Exactly. And transparency comes up again and again in the sources as being absolutely critical here. Employees really need to understand why monitoring is happening and how the tools are used. That's the only way to even try and lessen those negative cultural impacts, like the erosion of trust.
Right. And the sources even included that real-world example. Amazon getting that huge fine in France, 32 million, for what regulators called an excessive monitoring system.
Right.
It really shows this isn't just theoretical stuff. There are real consequences for getting it wrong.
Absolutely. It really underlines the importance of finding that careful balance the sources talk about.
Okay, let's pivot one more time to a related but slightly different cultural impact highlighted in the material, which is the decrease in actual face-to-face interaction thanks to all these digital tools and flexible work patterns.
Yeah, and this has really tangible effects on the culture. It makes it harder for people to build those personal connections with colleagues, the informal chats, the things that build trust and team spirit organically. It can definitely lead to people feeling isolated, and that ultimately weakens, inclusion and teamwork across the whole company.
And the sources make a really good point about digital communication itself. Like when you don't have the video on, or you're just using text chat, you lose all those nonverbal cues. Facial expressions, body language. It's just so much easier for misunderstandings to happen, maybe even conflict, which obviously isn't great for a collaborative culture.
So what do the sources suggest organizations can do about this? How do they try and counter it?
Well, they talk about being really intentional about creating opportunities for human connection, even digitally. Prioritizing video calls when possible, encouraging chats that aren't strictly about work, trying to replicate those coffee machine moments online, and even designing specific online team building things for remote and hybrid teams. There was that great specific example from the Hotjar blog in the sources, wasn't it? Really creative. They recognized that with remote work, people in different departments just weren't bumping into each other, which could feel a bit awkward, maybe siloed. So their approach involves getting new hires to set up one-on-one video calls with lots of different people across the company right in their first week.
Mm-hmm. And they have that ongoing thing too, the donut calls, where the system randomly pairs up two people from anywhere in the company for just a casual 30-minute video chat. The whole point is literally to recreate those water cooler moments and build connections between departments to make the whole team feel more cohesive.
That's a really smart, conscious way to try and engineer those sort of accidental connections that we lose with remote tech. But the material also included the other side of that coin. The counterpoint. Some employers are still convinced that you absolutely need a certain amount of physical face-to-face time, whether it's office meetings or saying people have to come into the office a minimum number of days. They feel it's essential for the culture they want.
Yeah, and that really gets to a core question that seems to run through the sources. Can digital connection truly replicate the depth, the nuance of being in the same room when it comes to building a strong, unified culture? It's still an open question, I think.
Okay, so just to sort of wrap up the main points from the material you shared, we've looked at three big ways new tech is hitting organizational culture. That always-on pressure, the whole complex issue around employee monitoring, and then the challenges from having less face-to-face interaction.
Right. And while the sources definitely acknowledge the huge benefits these technologies bring, the message seems clear that actively managing these potential negative impacts on culture isn't just nice to have. It's actually crucial for the health of the organization.
And the key strategies mentioned in the sources for doing that, they seem to circle back to more, human approaches, right?
Yeah.
Setting clear boundaries for work-life balance, being transparent, especially about monitoring, actively fostering real human connections, and really prioritizing employee well-being as fundamental to the culture.
It feels like the central challenge laid out in the sources is making sure the technology serves the people and strengthens the culture, instead of unintentionally letting it erode those things.
Exactly. So as we finish up this deep dive, thinking about everything we've unpacked from the sources on tech and culture, let's bring it back to you, listening. Given how fast technology just keeps changing, here's something to think about. How can organizations move beyond just reacting? How can they proactively design their cultures and use these tools strategically to make sure they genuinely support well-being and real connection in the future? And maybe, what's your role? What responsibility do individual employees have in shaping this culture through how you use technology every day? Definitely something to mull over as we all navigate this evolving landscape.